Bonsoir. It's a pleasure being here, and it's my first time in this city. It's very beautiful. I'm sure it's even more beautiful when the weather is nice. Yeah, it's a great pleasure to see a lovely crowd of people here tonight, and we're going to have some questions and answers, hopefully. Yeah, I hope you have a wonderful evening. Yes, it's been quite a long career. I started working as an illustrator in 1970 after leaving art college. And at that time, my ambition was just to make a living as an illustrator, and I was happy to do any kind of work, and I did advertising and book covers. And but I pretty soon found a kind of a line of work that suited me, and that kind of led in a particular direction. And that was doing historical romance novels and Victorian classics and anything historical, lots of ghost stories and horror stories, anthologies. But my ambition was really to work on larger projects in the form of children's books, and a passion for Tolkien that I discovered when I was about 17 helped to kind of lead me in this particular direction, and that was really. It was a book called Fairies that I did together with Brian Froud, who later became famous for his designs for the Dark Crystal films and Labyrinth. And that really gave me a bit of time to kind of really concentrate on the type of work that I wanted to do, which was in the area of myth and romance and fantasy. And that led eventually, of course, to Tolkien. I don't think I really read Unfinished Tales in any depth before the concept of illustrating actually came up. I'd read the Silmarillion, and I'd read most of Tolkien's published work, and I was aware that there were these other books, the Book of Lost Tales and Unfinished Tales, and Tales from the Perilous Realm, and all these other stories about Tom Bombadil, and I found all that really fascinating. But I didn't really have time as an illustrator to kind of really delve into those stories in any great detail until after I illustrated the Lord of the Rings in '92 for the centenary edition, and then The Hobbit a few years later, and then the ideas of doing these other stories started to come up, and I was very pleased to be in a position to be able to investigate those more fully. Yes, you're right. That is a kind of limitation that you have to accept as a book illustrator. Either that, or you spread the illustration across the double page, and then you have the gutter in halfway through the picture. And Ted Naismith gets around this by turning his pictures on their side, so that you can have a landscape format. There's something that I kind of resist that in a way, because when I'm reading a book, I don't really like to turn the book on its side for some reason. I like the feeling of reading and looking at the pictures to be almost a kind of a harmonious continuum in a way. So I like the text that I'm illustrating to relate directly to the picture on that same page or the opposite page, and and just enhance the reader's enjoyment of the story. And so I do like to work in a landscape format, but I think I've saved that for working in film and other mediums. I didn't know about the blue wizards being fought over by John and Ted. That's interesting. No, the way that we didn't actually have a discussion between us about who was going to do what, except through the editor, Chris Smith. And I knew that there were certain pictures that John would really excel at and would really want to do. And Ted had, at an early stage, he'd earmarked a few pictures that he wanted to do. And I think it kind of all fell into place quite well, actually. I mean, I don't think we really kind of had any squabbles about who was going to do the. I was happy to do the pictures that I did, and I think the one I enjoyed most was the meeting of Gandalf and Thorin just outside Bree, which forms the sort of the foundation of the whole story of the quest for Erebor. Yes, the process of doing an illustration obviously starts with reading the text as closely as possible and making notes, and then just doing lots of drawings in sketchbooks, and often sitting in a cafe with a sketchbook, just coming up with little sort of thumbnail sketches, ideas for compositions. And then those sketches gradually take more form and get larger, and until I do a sort of a drawing at the finished side, the side that I'm going to paint the finished picture, in which I kind of work out everything that I'm going to put into the picture, and then transfer that to watercolor paper and start painting. I'm not sure if they're as much unique as that I'm lucky, really. I've just been blessed with being in the right place at the right time. And so I think what I do have is a sense of a sense that the text is the most important thing, and that I'm not going to use the text as an excuse to, create some wonderful, fantastic showpiece. I'm trying to kind of serve the text as much as possible, and in order to do that, I try to avoid painting the most kind of dramatic and important parts of the story. I tend to prefer to set the scene and allow a sense of anticipation and mood and atmosphere to dominate, so that the reader's mind is kind of put in the right setting, really, for the action that's going to happen. Avoiding competing with the words, but trying to support them. I think that I really enjoyed the process of illustrating the Lord of the Rings, as much as I love the whole of Tolkien's world, and am intrigued by finding out more about the background behind the characters and the history and the culture, and I love it, exploring that through pictures. But I find that the Lord of the Rings is just a masterpiece. It's a literary, unique and brilliant literary feat of imagination. So I just felt very, very kind of honoured and pleased to be able to kind of be associated with that. And I think the fact that I was able to spend the amount of time that I did, I think it took 18 months or maybe 2 years to produce the 50 paintings that I did for the Lord of the Rings. 50. Yeah. That just meant that there was a tremendous immersion in that story over that period, and that was a wonderful privilege. Most of my work is done in watercolour, maybe with a bit of pencil in there as well. And for some reason, the cover for the new book, The Fall of Numenor, I did entirely in Photoshop. That's Photoshop as a kind of a painting medium rather than a method of kind of blending photographs. Actually, the process was kind of interesting. I bought an iPad a little while ago, and I really enjoyed working in a program called Procreate on my iPad. And you can do very, very quick colour sketches. And I just did this sketch that took me about 2 or 3 minutes, and it just seemed to have an interesting quality to it. So I mailed it to myself and put it into Photoshop, and then kind of transformed it and worked it up. And I think I spent about 3 weeks or so doing this very, very highly detailed Photoshop study that turned into a huge Photoshop file. And it's very different from the usual, the usual look that I try to get with watercolor. But it was just such a dramatic scene, and kind of an unusual perspective that, it just seemed to work. Well, I did spend a little while working on this new animated film, which is, I think it's going to be called The War of the Rohirrim? The War of the Rohirrim. And there were some scenes in there that they were keen to get my take on. And but it didn't amount to very much work. It was about 2 or 3 weeks. And I very rarely actually talk to John about what he's doing, so I get kind of gossip about him from other people more often. And then I realised that he was working on the same thing as well. It's very often like that, we don't know what the other hand is up to, and so I have no idea what he was doing for that film, but I think he's been much more closely involved with the Amazon series, the Rings of Power. But I can't really say anything about the War of the Rohirrim film because I don't know. I know very little about it, and I think it's going to be quite a while before it comes out. It's going to be a fully animated film, so that'll be quite a long process. That's about all I can say. Well, my love is, apart from Tolkien himself, my real passion is for myth and folklore, and in particular the mythology of the British Isles and Scandinavia. And I want to explore that more in a more thorough way. So I plan to do a book on myth and folklore with a kind of emphasis on the Celtic and the Scandinavian material that would have been very, very familiar to Tolkien, and that eventually found its way into much of his work. So it's still kind of dealing with the same material. A little while ago, I did a book of Anglo-Saxon poems, which was done as a limited edition by the Folio Society. And that almost felt like I was still illustrating Tolkien in a way, because reading that language and those kind of powerful verses just evoked Tolkien's world and the stories that he loved. And so, yeah, I'm still in the same kind of milieu, and but I'm not sure if there will be another Tolkien book. Then that's always possible. Yes, you've mentioned two of my largest influences, really. The painters of what's termed the Northern Renaissance, the Jan van Eyck and that whole kind of genre of painting was tremendously influential, as well as the Pre-Raphaelites. I just love that almost kind of magical sense of attention to detail that takes kind of ordinary objects and just kind of transforms them into something almost mystical. So yeah, I haven't been to Bruges, or and I haven't spent much time in this in Flanders, but the Flemish painters had a tremendous impact on me. Thank you for that question. I had the great privilege of being able to work on the Lord of the Rings films, and it was a huge part of my life in the end. I went to New Zealand at the invitation of Peter Jackson to work for 6 months on the films, and ended up staying for 6 years and working on every aspect of the design of the films, and I even ended up designing the packaging for the DVDs. So it was a thorough immersion in the world of film, and tremendously hard work, but really very, very satisfying. It's probably the hardest and longest period of sustained hard work that I've ever been involved with, but a great pleasure as well. Thank you. Yeah, it's a very interesting question, because I generally take the attitude that a filmed version of a work is its own thing, and that you can experience the film and then go back to the books and not really be affected by it, to read the books in the same kind of innocent way that you would have read it without having seen the film. But I can't really say that that's completely true of The Lord of the Rings. And I think it was, for me, one of the examples of that is that, I had a particular conception of Gandalf before working on the films. And then seeing Ian McKellen bring Gandalf to life in that magnificent way that he did, really kind of enhanced my understanding of the character, and has kind of replaced the picture that I previously had of Gandalf. So even when I'm reading the books now, and I'm reading Gandalf's dialogue, I'm hearing Ian McKellen's voice, because it was just so perfect. So it had to change the way I think of the books, and but mainly for the better. Yeah, thank you. That's a really interesting question. I think as an illustrator, I tend to be quite evasive in a way, to try to, I don't want to over-illustrate or over-design anything. I like to kind of build the scene in the reader's and the viewer's imagination. And I don't really like illustration that really kind of is over explicit and kind of defines every single thing. I like to leave kind of areas that are undercooked in a way and kind of shadowy. But in film, you can't do that. You have to absolutely decide what something is going to look like, because it's going to have to be made. And for the Lord of the Rings, we had to make every single prop, every costume, every element had to be designed and really thought through. And that's, it's a very different discipline. It's one that I thoroughly enjoyed, but it's not my natural tendency to want to kind of pin everything down. But you can't be sort of talking very kind of general and vague terms to somebody who's going to build something. You've got to be just absolutely specific. And so it was another, really interesting thing to try to develop, to do drawings that told you as much as possible about an object, a cloak, a staff, a saddle, a door, a window, and but going back to books again, I don't feel that's really fed back into the work that I do. I'm still kind of quite vague and evasive at heart in my illustration. I guess I'm often asked this question if I have a favourite character, and I think one of the amazing things about the Lord of the Rings is that as readers, we kind of enter that world at the same level as the hobbits. We have access to what they're thinking and feeling. So we're kind of journeying into Middle-earth with that same kind of sense of wonder, that same sense of a huge, unexplored and new world that they're encountering. So I think I'm probably naturally disposed to kind of a hobbit frame of mind, but I think if there's one character that I really like in both in the books and in the films, it's a character of Eowyn, the daughter of Theoden, and or the niece, yeah, and I just really like the way that her story and her character kind of changes through the film and the story. I think Eowyn, yeah.